Picture buying a house with just one room, a bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom. That's it. And instead of that being the final answer, it's actually just the starting point. A year later, you buy a second module. It gets craned into place, bolted onto the first one, and suddenly you have a living room. A couple years after that, when the kids need their own space, you add a third module. The house didn't get demolished and rebuilt. It grew, piece by piece, like it was designed to expand from day one, because this is a real company with real houses built on a real patent. And once I started digging into it, I found something even bigger hiding underneath this one company's idea, because the entire tiny house movement has quietly been doing the exact same thing on a much larger scale for the better part of a decade. The very definition of tiny has been creeping upward year after year, and almost nobody's talking about it. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a house can be engineered to grow with you, why the tiny house industry's own definition of tiny has stopped meaning what it used to, and the one structural problem that makes expanding a house so much harder than it sounds. That last part changes how you should think about any growing tiny house before you ever put money down on one. Before we get into it, if clever, real-world housing innovation is something you're into, hit subscribe right now, because we track down stories like this one every single week. Alright, let's actually get into the house that grows. Let's start with the clearest, most literal example of a house that gets bigger every year on purpose. A company out of Pittsburgh called Module Housing. The founder, Brian Gaudio, has an architecture background and spent time working in Biloxi and in Latin America, watching families build their own homes slowly, a little at a time, only as they could actually afford it. That experience shaped his entire pitch. Instead of buying a 7-room house you might not need for a decade, why not buy exactly the 1 or 2 rooms you need right now and genuinely add on as your life changes? Their starter model, called the Nook, is a compact 1-bedroom home. When a family situation changes, more kids, an aging parent moving in, a home office becoming a real need, they simply order another module. Gaudio's team developed what they describe as a patented removable roof and wall system, specifically engineered to make adding a new room dramatically simpler than a traditional home addition, where you'd normally need to tear open an existing wall, deal with unpredictable structural surprises, and hope the new addition matches the old construction. With a modular system, the roof and wall panels are designed from day one to detach and reattach cleanly, because the whole house was engineered around the idea that today's shape isn't the final shape. Gaudio has described the underlying business model almost like a subscription. Buy a starter home now, then purchase additions and upgrades later, as your family grows, your income grows, or your needs simply change. It's a genuinely different way of thinking about a house, not as a single, finished purchase, but as a foundation you build on top of, quite literally, over years. On price, the 1-bedroom Nook starter home has been documented at around $212,000, with land preparation and foundation work as separate costs on top of that. That's not a cheap starter home by any stretch, but the pitch isn't really about the sticker price of the first module. It's about avoiding the much larger jump of buying, say, a full 4-bedroom house you might not actually need for another 5 or 10 years, and paying to heat, cool, and maintain all of that extra space in the meantime. The company has raised over $1 million in funding and had working prototype houses built and demonstrated, with a reservation system for interest to buyers similar to how some car companies handle pre-orders for a new model. Module housing isn't the only group playing with this idea, either. Some designers have taken the grows every year concept in a completely different direction, up instead of out. A project called the Micro House from Studio Lubin was designed around small, individual modular rooms, each one sized just enough for the basic human motions of sitting, standing, and lying down, built from a lightweight but strong composite material. On its own, a single micro house unit can function as one small room, but the actual design intent is for multiple units to be grouped together over time, stacking and combining into a larger home, or even a multi-family building, as more units get added. It's the same underlying philosophy as module housing's bolt-on rooms, just expressed as small, light, easily moved individual pieces instead of large factory-built sections craned into place. What both approaches share is the same core insight. Instead of designing one fixed-size house and hoping it fits your life for the next 30 years, design the smallest possible functional unit and treat growth as something the architecture expects and plans for, rather than something a family has to fight their existing four walls to achieve later. Here's what surprised me most while researching this. The "how's that grows" isn't actually a new idea. It's a rediscovery of something that's been solving real housing crises for decades, just outside the US. Chilean architect Alejandro Aravena, who later won architecture's biggest global prize, formalized this exact concept under the name incremental housing. In parts of South America, many families simply couldn't qualify for a mortgage large enough to buy a complete house outright. So Aravena's approach flipped the entire model. Build a basic structurally sound frame, good bones so to speak, and let families fill in and expand the rest of the house themselves, exactly as fast as their savings allowed. You could only buy as much house as you'd actually saved up for, and the design accounted for that reality from the very beginning instead of pretending everyone could simply afford a finished home on day one. That's the same instinct driving companies like modular housing today, just applied to a very different market. Not people who can't get a mortgage at all, but people who specifically don't want to overbuy space they won't need for years, if ever. Both versions of the idea agree on the same core principle. A house doesn't have to be a single, finished object. It can be a starting frame that's honestly, structurally designed to keep changing. Now here's the part of the story that I think is actually the more interesting one, because it's not about one company's clever engineering. It's about the entire tiny house movement, quietly, collectively growing over the years. When a modern tiny house movement really took off around the mid-2010s, the definition people generally agreed on was strict: a dwelling under 400 square feet. Full stop. That's actually still the number written into the 2018 International Residential Code, which defines a tiny house as a dwelling unit with a maximum of 400 square feet of floor area, not counting lofts. But go looking at how the industry itself talks about tiny today, and that number has visibly crept upward. Multiple sources covering the space now openly describe homes up to 1,000 square feet as fitting under the tiny house umbrella, more than double the original code definition. Buyer surveys back this up too. One widely cited 2022 survey of tiny house owners put the actual average size at around 200 square feet, but plenty of builders now regularly sell finished tiny homes in the 300 to 400 square foot range, edging right up against, and often past, that original ceiling. Why is this happening? A few honest, practical reasons keep showing up. People who go tiny still want a real kitchen, a real bathroom, sometimes a proper loft bedroom with standing headroom instead of a crawl space. And fitting all of that in comfortably tends to eat up more square footage than the earliest, more austere tiny house builds ever budgeted for. Builders have also responded to demand for more amenities: full-size appliances, larger water heaters, more storage, all of which push a design a little bit bigger than the model that came before it. Nobody sat down and decided to redefine tiny. It just happened gradually, one slightly bigger build at a time, the same way the average size of a regular American home also crept up for decades before recently starting to level off. And that last comparison is worth sitting with for a second, because it puts this whole trend in perspective. The average American single-family home went from around 1,660 square feet in 1973 to roughly 2,687 square feet by 2015, a jump of about 60%, even as the average number of people living in each home actually shrank. Tiny houses started as a direct rebellion against exactly that kind of growth. And yet, on a much smaller scale, you can already see the same gravitational pull happening inside the tiny house world itself. There's a market size angle here too, worth mentioning honestly. Industry market research put the U.S. tiny home sector at roughly $2.5 billion back in 2023, and one broader global forecast values the entire tiny homes market at over $6 billion in 2025, projected to keep climbing steadily through the early 2030s. A growing market tends to mean more builders competing for the same buyers, and more builders competing tends to mean more feature creep. A slightly bigger fridge here, a proper washer-dryer there, a full walk-in shower instead of a wet bath. Each addition reasonable on its own, but adding up over a decade into homes that would have been considered borderline, not tiny by the movement's original standards. So if growing a house sounds so appealing, Why isn't every builder doing it? Here's the honest engineering problem underneath all of this. Physically expanding an already built structure is a lot harder than it looks on paper, and it's a problem that shows up whether you're talking about a modular add-on home or a tiny house on wheels with a slide-out section. Patent filings around expandable tiny house trailers actually spell this out directly. When you extend a large section outward from just one side of a structure, the whole thing tends to become unbalanced and unstable because you've suddenly shifted a lot of weight and structural load off to one edge. That's exactly why some expandable trailer designs use smaller and larger extendable sections that overlap and oppose each other. Instead of just one giant slab sliding out from a single wall, it's a direct engineering answer to that stability problem. Modular add-on homes, like module housing's design, sidestep some of that specific instability issue because each new module is essentially its own complete, separately supported structure bolted onto the last one, rather than one wall sliding out from existing frame. But that approach comes with its own genuine complexity. Getting roof lines, wall panels, and structural connections to line up cleanly between a module built this year and one built several years later requires serious upfront engineering discipline, so that today's edition and next year's edition still fit together properly instead of creating awkward seams, water intrusion points, or mismatched structural loads down the line. Industry data on modular expansion actually backs up how much more efficient this plan approach can be over a traditional renovation. Projects have reportedly moved 30 to nearly 50% faster than conventional add-a-room construction, precisely because so much of the hard engineering work gets solved once at the design stage, rather than being reinvented on-site for every single addition. One documented example describes a family adding 2 extra bedrooms plus a sunroom to an existing modular home in just 12 weeks, roughly half the time a comparable conventional site-built addition would typically take. But that efficiency only holds if the original design genuinely planned for growth from day one. Bolt an addition onto a home that was never engineered to expand, and you're right back to fighting the same unpredictable structural surprises incremental housing was invented to avoid in the first place. There's also a less glamorous, purely practical wrinkle worth mentioning: permitting and financing. Every time you add a module or a room, in most places, that's a new construction project in the eyes of your local building department, which means new permits, new inspections, and potentially new property tax assessments, even if the physical work itself only takes a matter of weeks. None of that is a deal breaker, but it's part of the real cost of growing a house that a slick product demo tends to skip right over. So, is there really a tiny house that keeps getting bigger every year? Genuinely, yes, in 2 different senses. There are real, specific homes, like module housing's designs, engineered from day one, with a patented system that lets you literally bolt on another room whenever your life calls for it. A modern, American version of an idea that architects like Alejandro Aravena were already using to solve housing affordability years earlier. And there's the entire tiny house movement itself, which has been quietly redefining what tiny even means, drifting from a strict 400 square foot ceiling toward homes the industry now casually describes as tiny at up to 1,000 square feet. Neither of those is a bad thing, necessarily. A house that can genuinely grow with a family solves a real problem. But it's worth being honest with yourself about which one you're actually buying into: a home deliberately engineered for expansion from the ground up, or a tiny house that's just quietly gotten bigger to keep up with everyone else's growing expectations. If you want to see what it's actually like living in one of these modular, expanding homes years after the first module went in, what the seams look like, what it costs to add a room, whether it really does hold up the way the pitch promises, that's exactly what we're covering next. So stay subscribed and keep your notifications on. Thanks so much for sticking with me all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, would you buy the smallest possible starter home today, planning to grow it room by room, or would you rather just buy the space you need all at once? See you in the next one.